This is Caffeinated Risk, the monthly podcast for security professionals by security professionals, focused on the principles of enterprise security risk management, exploring technology and business management issues and how they relate to information security risk. Once a month, two self-proclaimed grumpy security guys bring you analysis, insights, and interviews with leading security risk professionals to learn how they work through a project, a program, or their careers using a risk-based approach to security. Now, here are your hosts, Tim McCreet and Doug Leese.
Welcome, Terry.
Thank you, Doug.
Maybe get you to introduce yourself, as you're not new to the Calgary security community, but maybe not quite as famous as some of our other people, but that's only because they haven't heard of you, not because...
Exactly. No, I am not famous in any way, shape, or form. My name is Terry Freestone, and I'm currently with the Canadian Energy Regulator, but today I'm speaking as myself. And I've been doing this way too long. Got started back in 97 when I was doing support for the Foothills Hospital ICU ward. Moved to oil companies after that, and I've taken care of drilling rigs, refineries, pipelines, gas stations, you name it in the space.
Yeah, in Calgary, we have one of everything, right?
Yeah, no kidding. At least.
No, welcome. Thanks very much. And it's refreshing to hear. And yes, people, that wasn't an audio glitch. He really did say 1997. There were computers back then. Because Tim and I were working on them too. So
yes,
we're all coming from a similar vintage.
Yeah.
And we've had a couple other Calgary-specific people that were here back in the day. But Calgary's sort of a unique city for a lot of reasons, including a big party starting at the end of the week. But
yeah, in just a couple of days, right?
You know, for the other 51 weeks of the year, 50, it takes a little bit to sober up from the party. For the other 50 weeks of the year, there is a lot of innovation and a lot of commercial business that goes on here. There's things that are built in warehouse bays all around this area. You know, something built down on Manitou Road that they're using in an oil field in Nigeria to make sure the pipeline wall is sufficient. Nobody really puts that together and go, that was built in Calgary? Yeah, it was invented here. So there's a lot of very industrious people here. Mm-hmm. And now it's a little different, but I think back then in the early days, it was because there was nobody else and there was nothing. So we kind of had to do it, but that's my opinion. I don't, what do you guys think?
I would agree completely. I mean, when I got started in this, it was people making companies to make something that they needed because no one else could sell them one. You know, there's lots of oil field companies like Rossdale Drawworks comes to mind. They still make the best drawworks in the industry, but no one else around town was even doing that.
Mm-hmm. Necessity, right? A lot of it was generated out of necessity. So.
Yes.
So the move from private industry to government is interesting, but you moved into a regulatory capacity, mm-hmm. Without talking too much about exactly what the government does or whatever. What's entailed to try and define risk management in a standard or something? Because you've been working on this standard.
Well, and it's not just me. So it's not just one guy going, hey, the standard is actually called CSA Standards at 246.1. And it originally came out, I think it was in 2013, to deal with physical security. And 2 versions ago, they started adding some components of cyber, which was great. And then with the 2021, we expanded it quite a bit. And we modified some of the wording in the other areas to reflect that when you're doing your risk management, you not only have to include your physical security, but you have to include cybersecurity and give it the same processes.
Okay.
And so far, that's been working pretty good. I mean, there's always challenges. This is a new area, but in general, it's people understand and kind of go, yes, it's the same framework. It's the same sort of idea when you're doing a risk analysis.
But how did that change though, Terry? Because I mean, having come from a physical security background and spent time in the cyber, yeah. So that's a longer story. But having started in physical and moved into cyber, there was this at least for me, there was a mindset change that had to occur. And then just a few years ago, probably about 10 years ago, then you realized, oh, it's all about risk. It still is the risk question. So did you guys come to that realization as well during the review of the standard and coming into this regulatory space that eventually it came back to the concept of risk?
That was one of the two we had. The other one that we realized was that a management system for one will work for the other. So yes, risk analysis, risk management, and a management system, both of them work for either. There's not much tailoring you have to do to switch between the two.
Man, we got to write this stuff down for somebody, right? So
Right. And I hear that a lot from people that are saying, oh, we're different or we're that different. And it's like,
no.
I think we could draw a line. Are you a not-for-profit or a for-profit organization?
I do see one other difference. If you're an insurance company, they look at it slightly different too, but that's about it.
Okay.
Because they actually need to worry about those payouts, and the rest of us are just kind of going, what really is the risk to my business?
Right.
So part of where we try and take this podcast is coming up with practical things that could help somebody get to understanding that. I'm better about it now, but I used to get really offended when people would use things like threat, risk, and vulnerability interchangeably. And it's like, you don't even know what those words mean. And I don't say that anymore. I still don't get invited to parties, but
Yeah, well, yeah.
Well, that has nothing to do with that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
No, and I get the same frustration. Fortunately for us, they are clearly defined in the standard. And go back to that if you need to. Now, really, that standard's not using different definitions than anything else out there that you'll actually read. It's when people kind of go, they think they know it, but they really haven't done any reading about it is when you get into those problems.
Okay.
And I suppose if I had to make one recommendation, it's actually start with threat. The old adage is a bald tire a risk.
Uh-huh.
Well, not if it's hanging by a rope from a tree.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
So, look at what your actual threats are. And from a business point of view, this lets companies focus their resources so they don't have to spend as much money. They don't have to spend as much time, and they actually know that what they're going to put in place is going to work.
Yeah. And I like that, right? Because that really starts to reflect what we've been trying to put into place with ESRM this past 15 plus years. It's focused on the business questions first, right? Because for years we got ahead of ourselves, right? We started looking at to your guys' points, mixing threat and vulnerability and risk and coming up with discussions that would more than likely annoy the hell out of most people. But when we finally started focusing on that business first and talking about the business first, it made it a bit easier because now we could look at what's the business outcome or what's the goals the business are trying to achieve. And are they going to want to spend $1 million to protect $1,000? Probably not. But if they invest $1,000 to protect $1 million, probably. Right? So it made it easier. But I don't know if you're finding that now as you continue to move into this regulatory space or in with the framework. Are you finding that it's easier to have those business discussions now? Because I know we didn't have them 20 years ago. I'm just wanted to get your thoughts. Are we starting to see them now?
With the business people, we are, and that helps it actually sell it across so that they understand why they need to do it. And at that point for them, they're seeing it as, oh, this is the cheaper option for me. It's also easy to show that if you get breached, you're going to spend easily 10 to 40 times what you're spending on this. And then they go, okay, yes, we will do this. Getting the technical people to explain it to the business is still a challenge.
Is that ever going to change? I mean, this has been decades and we've been saying the same thing. It's just like, how do we get folks to start looking at it from that different lens? It's one of the things I think that's what I want to focus on before I retire. I got like 5 years. So I figure I got like just a few more years to try to figure this one out. But Jesus, we still haven't got folks to get that focus yet.
Yeah, well, part of it is they don't understand why they need to. And I think that's where the business needs to come to them and say, here's why you need to explain it to us this way. Then they'll make a point. But both sides have a disconnect and they don't realize what part they both have to play.
My day job right now is a lot more on building detections for the very things that we're concerned about. And I have a lot of meetings trying to get to the bottom of what we're concerned about, because that is a very difficult thing to answer. And you can't say all the things because you can't afford all the things. And
the things.
We talk a lot about negative testing as something you should do, but try and think of all the other ways that somebody could try to do this, and you'll exhaust yourself and you're still going to miss things. And the real gap I'm seeing right now is we can't run that scenario or the multitude of scenarios and then answer the question, and then what happens?
Yes.
That's the real challenge I'm seeing. And I know with a certain other pipeline regulation, they're asking you to identify site criticality and things like that. I don't think that's a bad idea. I'm not sure I'm 100% on board with how they're considering that, but at least we're asking the grown-up question. Of all the stuff you got, which stuff matters the most?
Yes.
And why? And if that wasn't there, then what happens? That's really it in a nutshell. But I'm amazed at how seldom we can actually answer that concisely.
Well, and that's why we turn it around a little. We do ask the same question, but what we ask is, okay, now does management agree with you and understand that priority? Have they told you that, or is that your guess? If management and the business say, yes, this is a priority and that's why, great. That's what the business tells you. That's what you work on. If you're trying to sell them, no, let's get management in here. Let's talk.
Right. No, and that makes sense, right?
And we're not going to ever say it's right or wrong, but you got to, show us that you've explained to management and they understand.
Now, if you're in a scenario where management doesn't know, and I don't know, I ask the techies and stuff like that, and maybe it's a question for both of you, like how do you get that clarity out of your client?
I'll let Terry start, right? So, yeah.
Oh, well, mine's easy because I actually have this piece of legislation that says, yes, you have to show me. So I say, okay, show me your decisions, show me the documentation. Yeah. And if you can't, then I'm going to go ask your accountable person. And as soon as I bring up that last line, I usually get panic looks, and all of a sudden the documentation starts coming out, or they admit what's really going on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Similar. I don't have the legislation, but it comes down to cost, right? So for me, it's when you always ask the question, do you have these, what do you have? What's the elements of your risk-based approach? And if they don't have that, that's terrific. We can always help you create it, but normally that's out of scope and that's an additional cost. And that's something that if you wanted to get on this path and you do require it, that's awesome. But let's understand what that's going to take into account. And then again, same thing, room gets a little quiet. People start looking around. If they had a BlackBerry, they'd be looking at it doing the prayer right about now, trying to avoid the conversation. So that's the interesting part, is when they realize that they don't have, or they need to go find, or they haven't got the documentation, or they're not aware of what the elements need to be for that approach. That's when we started to find. Most times though, folks at least come back and say, well, can you help? Or what is it? That's what I kind of wanted to ask here is when you're looking at some of these engagements, I guess that's the best way of putting it, or when you're dealing with some of the clients that you deal with, what have you found that have been some of those essential elements of that risk-based approach? And what are you looking for? Or what, what have you ever walked into one place and went, holy God, I got to write this down because these guys nailed it. You don't have to talk about the company, but have you actually seen all the elements of a risk-based approach in that first or second or third meeting when you talk to somebody?
We have, and the better ones are usually the more concise ones. Right. A lot of the more mature ones are getting complex to the point where you can't ask one person. It takes multiple people to get the answer, and yes, we can piece it together. But I find that when it's that complicated, it's not helping the business either. The ones where, anyone come and say, this is our process, that's the ones that are working. Those are the ones that are getting results. Because everyone understands what they have to do. They understand what needs to go in. And then the business person go, this is my decision based on that.
Wow. See, sock puppets and crayons. I'm saying this has been my entire career. If you can keep it that easy, everything else gets simple after that, right? So,
Yeah. Well, the other thing which we find though is people don't always understand what they have. And you'll get the high level of answer, well, I got to keep the pipeline flowing. What are the parts of your pipeline? And that's why they're having problems. Even at the business level and the technical level, they don't understand what they have and what it takes to keep the business running. The two sides aren't talking enough. In our industry, it's not actually that hard to break it down. Move oil from this tank to other tank. Send customer the bill. Do it safely.
Mm-hmm.
There's our 3 steps.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Then you can ask questions like, well, how does it get there? Oh, we use a pump. Okay.
Yeah.
How do you know that pump's working? Great. Oh, do it safely. How do you know the pipe's not leaking? Oh, well, we got this other system to monitor.
Yes.
So who can tamper with that? Right? And you can start to lead down the various paths. But in every question that you're asking, it still ties back to move the oil from A to B and do it safely.
And get paid for it.
Yeah.
Well, getting paid for it's nice.
Yeah.
But that's a step that you won't, if you don't have in the business, you don't have a business.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, that does take care of itself. So the people that buy your assets will make sure they know how they're getting paid.
Yeah.
That's the other irony of here in Calgary is that it's the same assets, but they've had many different owners.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So mergers and acquisitions is always a reality.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's almost like going, I wouldn't say a garage sale is a bad analogy, but you're buying somebody else's stuff and trying to make it work with your stuff. Do you find that is a real pain point?
For some companies, yes. Some companies, no. The ones where management went, oh, this will be a good buy, yes. The ones where management went, yeah, we actually have similar philosophies. We've bought similar equipment in the past. Those ones that are having far less of a problem doing their integrations.
That's interesting because that's one of the things that was always an issue, over, at least for me over the years, was doing mergers and acquisitions. I was part of a company that had a big spurt of growth. They were buying lots of assets in the US, and when we were challenged to help out, get them integrated, bring them in, it was, the fun part was always, as you open the door and you start looking at, what the hell is this? And then it's, you start having those conversations at about 2 p.m. on a Monday, and you don't solve the problem until Friday. Those were difficult meetings to have.
Yep.
Especially when you're the company being bought. There wasn't a whole lot of, I can't wait to tell you everything bad that's going on in our company. It just didn't have a lot of those open conversations, right? So it took time to win the trust first off, to let them know, and then to integrate and bring them in. So it became, for us, the challenge was always trying to understand the culture and where they were going and what we were trying to do.
Yes.
Technology was always going to be there as a secondary, but it was that first part, understanding the culture. And then, we asked questions too about what's your appetite for risk? How do you guys manage risk?
Yeah.
How do your risk assessments look like? And then, you get into here's the threat, vulnerability, and risk collage that was interesting to sort through. When we finally got some more details we could work with, the ones where we probably had some of the greatest success was when they thought the same way and had everything documented the same way, or when they understood the concept of risk, threat, vulnerability, and how they can manage it. That made it easier for us, right? Because we could come in, we were all speaking pretty much the same language. We saw what they had in place. We were able to integrate it and bring it up to speed and bring it into the platform fairly quickly. So that made it easier. Other times it was just, wow, there was a lot of discussions with adult beverages in the evening was pretty much the best way to describe some of those ones. Those were fun, right?
Well, and that documentation part is actually key. If they haven't explained it to themselves, they can't explain it to you. But once they've had to write that out for their own management, then they'll get it. Then they can tell you. That's when it got easy.
Yeah, agreed. No, agreed.
I haven't seen any of the content yet, but you were telling me about another approach you were thinking of for risk management for smaller organizations who didn't have unlimited resources. And do you think that's viable? Like,
Very.
How many people does one need to have a good risk management program? And
one, if they understand what they're doing. Now,
Yeah.
other people will help in terms of getting the information in, and it's always good to have communication people to talk to execs and translate. But if they know what they're doing, one person really can't do this. They just need to get all the information into them to begin with. And again, it doesn't have to be complicated. Yes, you're going to need things like an inventory. You can't properly identify your vulnerabilities if you don't have it. Yes, you have to understand your business well enough to know what's threatening it. List out the threats, take a look at your assets. What vulnerabilities do you have that those threats could attack? Now you've got your risks.
yeah,
Let's prioritize them and look for critical things like injury or environmental damage or loss of life.
I've been in many, many companies where they invest heavily in software. And we actually had a guy on that was denied the funding for said product, built it himself, and it was so good that he turned it into a business.
Good for him.
Yeah.
Good on him. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
But it sounds like many of the things we're talking about could be managed in a small desktop type database or spreadsheets or something like that. It doesn't need to be an elaborate multi-vendor thing. But at what point do you think an organization does need to get to that level of?
That depends more on management than anything else. I mean, in the very basic forms, you take a look at a task hazard analysis that field staff are going to use to make sure that they're safe doing their day-to-day job. It really is that same process brought up to a larger scale. If management is okay with yes, someone could get hurt / it'll cost us this much if it goes wrong, then you don't need to get very complicated. You will need something simple, Excel or a database to keep track of them and to give you, this is our highest value one down to the lowest one. But it doesn't need to be that complicated. I mean, there's one which I used at one previous employer called Simple Risk, and they've even got a free version. Quite frankly, it was overkill for us.
Like it was more than good enough.
Yes, but having the process mattered more than having the tool.
Right. And that's what warms my heart being a cheap security guy, to hear that you could actually do this. You don't need to spend millions putting in a software platform and bring people in from the US up to Canada to help tune it. So yeah, it's nice to not have to worry about that, right? So
yeah. When I see a team bring out an Archer report, it's like, okay, I'm pretty sure you've got a very thorough understanding of things and the report will show me that. But at the same time, I've seen others who have a very good understanding that didn't have that fancy, expensive tool. They just actually used the process properly.
Right. That gives me hope, right?
Yeah, hope for sure. When you mentioned the process, like what I took away from some of these guidelines and stuff is that they're looking for you to have a process, but they don't have a specific thing like you would for making donuts or something like that.
Not in that way. We do have specific requirements, but they're in terms of make sure you've got a process to identify threats. Make sure you've got a process to identify vulnerabilities. Make sure that the information from those two processes feeds your risk process. Mm-hmm. We're not telling you how to do each part, but we're saying that, yes, you've got to use the information from the other two to feed the third one.
Yeah. Now, how do we get more grant? Like, I realize there's serious value in high, medium, and low when I can only fix one thing. But what are the meaningful things that would contribute to that prioritization conversation so that you're really not just taking, a vuln scanner's version or a pen tester's version of that's a high risk because something could happen. It's like, yeah, but it's going to happen to something that doesn't mean anything to my organization. So that's not a high risk.
No, and that's where, again, they're only looking at part of it. When they're going with a pen test or a vulnerability scan, they're only looking at the vulnerabilities. They're not looking at who would attack them, how they would be attacked, and why they'd be attacked. if you start with those threats, you're going to end up with a really short list. I mean, there's 7 common threats, 3 internal, 4 external. There's going to be others which are business specific risks, or business specific threats. My apology on that. But those ones all have, firm financial numbers where you can say, yeah, if, the interest rates go up, then it's going to affect the business this way. And that's the business's problem.
Right.
So those ones are simple for them. If you look at those 7 basic threats and kind of go, okay, who's going to attack me with those? Why are they going to do it? What are they going to hit, i.e., what are the vulnerabilities that they can exploit? Then you've just narrowed your work a lot.
Yeah, and I think you have to, because in order to do a thorough treatment of some of these things, it can be quite a bit of work.
Yep.
And you better make sure you're working on the right thing, because you're going to be 3 months either way.
Well, sometimes yes, sometimes no. That's where, when you start getting into it, you can actually get some very high returns quickly and cheaply once you understand what it is you're trying to stop. Or you can waste a lot of money because you're kind of going, well, everyone else is doing it, so maybe I should do this too. And then you find out, it's going to help like less than 1% of the time.
Yeah.
There goes $5 million down the drain.
And to me, that's important. Yeah, I agree, Terry, because that's important, right? For me, one of the things that I always struggled with was time, right? We never had enough time, or we had so many things to do in such a short period of time. So we had to become brutally efficient at picking those things we were going to invest a lot of time in. So what I like about this approach, like what you and Doug were just talking about, is it gives greater clarity on those things that you need to worry about, or that actually have the potential to do harm.
Yes.
And if you can understand what those are first and focus on those, then don't get me wrong, everyone wants to go home, thinking that they knocked every risk off the book. That's awesome, right? But the reality is it's never going to. I never, at 42 years in, I've never had that where I walked away from a day going, we are good, right? Like, no, never had that.
All done, front to back.
Yeah, it's all done. It's all good. I can actually walk away today. It's never going to happen. So, to me, it comes, one of the things I've learned as I've seen more time behind me than ahead of me, it's the value of time, and how much time are we going to spend on something, and can I give you back that time, or at least focus your time and use it better. That I like this approach. I like this description, because not everyone gets that right there. It's the 12 gauge approach to security, and that just doesn't work, right? You can't shoot it all, right? You can't get it all.
No. I mean, you're always going to need some of your basics, like have a firewall, do your patching, have an inventory. But that's because those are things which work against all basic attacks.
Yeah. We always seem to be in such a rush to get to the prize that we forget about those basic things, because who wants to do inventory? Nobody steps up.
Yeah. Fair.
And now you want to know which software's on there? Like, what? No, all of it. Like, all of it? Yeah, all of it.
Yeah.
Okay, but that goes back to your analysis. I mean, why do you need to know your software? So you can manage the vulnerabilities.
Yes.
But if you look at it in a bigger picture, you may not care. The example I love is firmware updates for PLCs. You look at almost all of them, and they're network-based attacks. So if this is going to work, either A, you've been dumb enough to put your PLC directly on the internet,
right,
or the attacker's already on your network, and you got bigger problems. So is it ever worth putting money into patching that PLC for security reasons? Do an analysis, but I think you'll kind of end up going, no, let's save the money and do something else.
Now, how do we address that when somebody runs back and it says here in my standard that I must have X, and the minute a vendor says there's a problem, I've got 35 days to do something?
Well,
it does seem like some of those standards are now saying you have 35 days to publish your decision.
Right.
That makes more sense.
Yeah. I like that approach, that I'm going to continue to not care about this because it still hasn't reached my threshold.
Well, it's a business decision, right? It becomes a business decision then based on the risk, right?
Right.
And that's where, to a certain extent, standards and regulators need to actually change how they're looking at it. I mean, NERC has done some wonderful work, but at the end of the day, I think it's proven that you can't legislate every nook and cranny and every detail that a company has to do because they're all too different.
Yes.
But you can say, get the results.
True.
Yes. You're responsible to know what you have and whether this is a problem or not.
Mm-hmm.
They may be wrong, but at least it acknowledges that there was some thought into it.
Yeah.
And we've been talking a lot about resilience as a better path forward for businesses than hoping nothing ever goes wrong. And
you know it's going to go wrong. That's why you've got to have detection and recovery.
so I know you're planning on doing a B-Sides talk on risk management for people that don't have big budgets forever, right? I think that was kind of the gist of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if somebody was listening now and they don't make it to B-Sides, what would be the best thing that they could take from that?
Start with your threats. Who would hurt you and why? And then what have you got to do? How would they hurt you? It'll tell you what they're going to attack. Then what's it going to take to stop them?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. If you can't answer those, then you need to go get those answers before you go shopping for stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll just buy everything, and now what?
Yeah.
And none of us have time to configure everything, let alone run it. So.
Oh, no. Yeah, no. No, that's awesome. No, that's perfect. Thanks for listening to the latest podcast from Caffeinated Risk. Make sure you visit our website, caffeinatedrisk.com, to stay up to date on what we've been working on. Our website has bios of our podcast guests, posts about topics we're passionate about, and even a library of reference material we find valuable in the work we do every day. And don't forget to subscribe to Caffeinated Risk on your favorite podcast service. This way, you'll be notified when we release our next podcast, and you can listen to our previous guests just in case you missed them. Thanks so much for listening to Caffeinated Risk.